on behalf of the Islamic Center of Oshawa Management and myself, the Imam here, that he has taken out time and come to help us and so that we can benefit from his expertise. And we also thank all of you for taking out your time to come here and participate with us. Interestingly, I just mentioned to Phil a little while ago that a couple of years ago, or many years ago now, he had actually presented to another Muslim congregation, and my father was the one that had introduced him, so following my father's footsteps, inshallah. So Phil is as an educator for more than 30 years. Phil has worked as a teacher consultant, and curriculum designer at all levels from elementary to post-secondary. His experience also includes 2 years at the Ontario Ministry of Education. During this time, he became concerned over the radical change in values being encouraged by the teachers' union and embraced by the education system. Further, he was very concerned by the lack of response of the parents to the imposed changes in values. As a director of Peace Ontario, Peace, which stands for Public Education Advocates for Christian Equity, Phil hopes to empower traditionally minded parents to, number one, build positive relations with their school, number two, help educators understand the need of their faith community, and number three, work with the schools to develop realistic and relevant learning accommodations. Peace chapters, domestically and internationally, work with religious organizations, parents, government representatives, and publicly funded school systems to understand, be informed, and improve communication around the issue of sensitive curriculum. So without any further delay, I will call upon Phil to come and start his presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. And I appreciate the opportunity to share and to possibly build a relationship with other faiths so that we can work together for the benefit of our children. And do you mind if I put this in my pocket? Is that all right? Thank you, because I wander. I think I'm not too far, though. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right. Give you a little bit of background. I spent, as Imam said, 29 years in public education. And during that time, 1996, my daughter was in grade 5. She came home very, very upset. And this curriculum that you're concerned about, this curriculum didn't just materialize. She was exposed to much of the content of this curriculum in grade 5 in 1996. She came home very upset. I came home from work, my wife says, Jennifer can't even tell us what happened. She's so upset. So I said, well, I can go and talk to the teacher. So I went and talked to the teacher, and to make a long story short, she'd been introduced to a video called Head Full of Questions. The video is for grades 3, 4, 5, and 6, ages 8 to 11. My daughter learned how to put a contraceptive on an anatomically correct model in grade 5 at 10 years of age. The video introduced her to alternative sexual lifestyles and introduced her to Fred and Anna, who meet in college. Now, Fred and Anna, who meet in college, they didn't talk about love, they didn't talk about committed relationships, they didn't talk about anything like that. But kind of like what our new curriculum talks about, they liked one another more than just friends. And that's the exact wording from the curriculum document. And Fred and Anna were converted into cartoon characters. And my daughter and the children in the classroom saw the entire sex act and not under the covers. And the emotions were displayed as winged, erect genitalia flying through the air. When I went to the school board and I asked the question, this isn't in the curriculum document in 1996, I was told teachers have the authority to go beyond the minimum expectations of the curriculum based on their understanding of the needs of the students. I went to the Ministry of Education, and I was told exactly the same thing. When I did the research, I found out this is the beginning. This was my first introduction to comprehensive sex education, which is what this curriculum is built upon. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But this curriculum has a long history. And some people say, if we get rid of the curriculum we got the churches, we got the faith groups to respond and express concern. When he removed the offensive pages, the curriculum continued to be taught in many, many classrooms. And we just didn't know. Because you know what the church and faith groups did? They said, oh, offensive curriculum is gone. We don't have to worry anymore. What I'm going to try to do tonight, this document has a huge history underneath it. It did not just materialize. Give you some understanding of that history. Because that is critical to understanding the problem we're experiencing right now. Second, we'll look at the sex ed curriculum. We'll look at the expectations, grade 1 to grade 8. We won't have time to look at every one, but we will do an overview so you have a better understanding. Third, what are the problems with comprehensive sex education? Because this is an international direction. What are the problems? And lastly, how should we respond? Now, when I say how should we respond, I may be talking, and I apologize, more from my Christian community, and I will be asking you, I'll share what we're doing, and how might that apply here? Okay? In 1996, my daughter was exposed to this, and when I did the research, I found out about comprehensive sex education. It was not in the curriculum, as I said, but the teachers, when they go to university, would be told, yes, the curriculum is based on this, but in addition, you might want to include, because children are going to be sexually active anyway, so you might want to include contraceptives, different kinds of sexual activity, because if we talk about anal sex and oral sex, and they choose to engage that way, then they won't get pregnant. And we talk about homosexuality, bisexuality, we talk about, and so all of this was introduced to the teachers. And if the teacher doesn't have a faith background, it says, maybe this makes sense. Teachers started bringing it into the classroom. And actually, it started coming in the late 1980s. In 1996, in the city of Hamilton, when this first came about, we started to do some research in some of our high schools. There was a document distributed by Public Health, and it introduced our children even to bestiality. So again, it was supplementary. It wasn't mandatory. Teachers did not have to teach it. Supplementary curriculum. Then in the late 1990s, I noticed, even in the schools, the teachers started bringing in, some teachers started bringing in these stories about alternative families. Stories like King and King. Wait a minute, King and King? Yes, this story is about a queen who's getting older, and she's very upset because her son, the prince, is not interested in getting married. And she's concerned about her kingdom. And on page 4, she's talking to the prince. And she says, "What's the matter with you? When I was your age, I was married at least twice." Well, not just a minute. We're not judging people that have had failed marriages. But even people that have gone through failed marriages would say, that's not the ideal I want presented to my child. Then he says, okay, Mom, if you're really upset with me, bring in the princess, and I'll see if I'm interested. First princess comes in, not interested. Second princess comes in, not interested. The third princess happens to come to the palace with her brother. The prince falls in love with the brother, and you know the rest of the story. This story, I have found, not just in grade 1 and 2 classes, this story is in daycare, starting at age 2. In addition, stories about transgenderism, boys that like to dress like girls, girls that like, etc. Okay, stories about different kinds of families started coming in to our schools, including, and somebody shared with me tonight, was it you said, You want to go? Well, why don't you share this particular story?
Oh yeah, my son went to the library and saw a book about penguins and brought it home, not knowing anything more about it.
Look at the book and go, oh, a story about penguins. It's about homosexual penguins. This is all started coming in the late 90s, early 2000s. So we've got comprehensive sex education, alternative sexual lifestyle stories, starting to come into our classrooms. And then in the early 2000s, in a few school boards in the province of Ontario, they started gay straight alliance clubs. Again, this was supplementary, it's not mandatory, but it began. You need to know that the gay straight alliance clubs were founded in the early 1990s. And this, it's a bit tattered, but this is the manual they created for high school students, and in it is the letter with all of the legal wording to request this, all of the agenda for all of the meetings, how to organize and how to set this all up. I say when I speak in Christian churches, I say, our kids need a manual to ask for their club. But these clubs are based on, are for students who self-identify as homosexual, bisexual, transgender, two-spirited. As a matter of fact, if you want to go through the list, the Toronto District School Board in their anti-bullying document lists 58 different sexual orientations. Okay? So these started to come, again, they weren't mandatory. They were for students who didn't feel comfortable in school. And I have to be honest, as a teacher, spent 29 years in public education, I understand there are many students that don't feel comfortable in school. There are many students, not just students who may self-identify as homosexual. But then in 2005, our Supreme Court officially approved same-sex marriage. So now, the comprehensive sex education, which was catering towards alternative sexual lifestyles, stories about alternative sexual families, gay straight alliance clubs, now these supplementary activities had legislative support. So what happened after that, 2006 to 2008, school boards began creating sexual orientation policies. And then the ministry mandated every board to create a sexual orientation policy. A policy that basically says we respect all sexual orientations, and when it comes to hiring practices and even curriculum and classroom activities. Okay. Then in 2009, the Ministry of Education created the Safe Schools Act. The Safe Schools Act mandated school boards to build relationship with the LGBT activist community, activists in the community, and they must be present in their schools. I don't have a problem with a homosexual who really cares about my son or daughter learning how to read and coming in and volunteering that way. But often this is being used for their particular agenda. But so now we have to build relationship. And then in the Safe Schools Act, Regulation 157, instructions to principals say this. Principals, if a student is victimized at school and the perpetrator has to be suspended, in other words, it's very severe, then the principal must inform the victim's families about what's happened and how the school is responding, unless the child self-identifies as homosexual. And if the principal is concerned that the parents may not honor the feelings of the child, then the principal is required, this is in law, to send the child to positive counseling that supports the child's feelings and not inform families. And there is no lower age limit. It doesn't say for kids that are 16 and over, 15 and over, there's no lower age limit. Okay? So are you starting to see this foundation underneath this curriculum? Then, in 2009, some of you may be familiar with the equity policy. The equity policy says all curriculum Now, all of this is policy. This was all not regulation. And the Ministry of Education, Kathleen Wynne at the time, was very upset because, and I spent 2 years at the ministry and so I've got some colleagues there, she was upset because some school boards would massage this because it's policy and they can adapt it to their community. It wasn't strong enough. So in 2011, they brought in legislation called Bill 13, or the Accepting Schools Act. In the Accepting Schools Act, in the legislature, the Minister of Education at the time was asked the question, what is the intent of the legislation? And she responded, the intent of Bill 13 is to change the traditional norms and values of society and change them for good. That's in the Hansard minutes. And then Barbara Hall, who's the head of the Human Rights Commission, she said, and when we get the public and Catholic schools fixed, we will move this out to private schools and to all public buildings. She even made comment about homeschooling. Okay? So the intent is to change the attitudes and values of society. The values within traditional Christian faith, and the values within your faith. If you're going to change the traditional norms and values of society, you're going to have some significant strategies. There are 3 strategies in the legislation. Number 1, remember the Gay Straight Alliance clubs? There were a few of them that started up. This requires every high school in the province of Ontario to have a Gay Straight Alliance club if a child asks. Any child. Well, guess what? Here's the manual. Under Safe Schools Act, the school board was required to build positive relations with the LGBT community. The LGBT community, with the manual, is going to be talking to kids in the high school about, don't you think you should be asking for a Gay Straight Alliance club? So now, mandating Gay Straight Alliance clubs. We'll talk about Gay Straight Alliance clubs in a minute. Second, sexual lifestyle instruction has to be integrated into every subject, every grade, every day. And third, when it comes to school rental agreements, I'm not sure how this applies in your faith community, but in the Christian churches, we had, up until Bill 13, thousands of small churches in Ontario that rented school facilities. They were told they could no longer rent school facilities unless they signed that they would operate by the provincial code of conduct and not by their doctrines. And somebody says, well, what's that mean? I said, well, an example. Maybe on your board of directors, you have a board of director that maybe is engaging in extramarital relationships. And the board says, we have to remove this person from the board. That's not consistent with the provincial code of conduct. You're operating in a discriminatory manner. You would not be allowed to operate your church facility that way. So now churches are not allowed to rent school facilities. All right. Do you see how they're forcing? And so when we have some faith groups that may be kind of wavering, it's causing more division in the faith group. Okay, let's talk about Gay Straight Alliance clubs. Again, we said they're clubs for students who self-identify as homosexual, bisexual, transgender, two-spirited, intersex, queer, questioning, or any one of the 54 other sexual orientations. Okay? These are mentored by LGBT people in the community and by school staff. And my concern is this: they often are used to organize school assemblies, especially around the anti-bullying issue. Okay? Now, I have a video, but I'm not, are we prepared to show it? Do we have speakers? Or we do? This is Dan Savage. Dan Savage is he's a homosexual activist in the United States. He's an activist on the Gay Straight Alliance clubs, and he's talking here to high school students. And he's talking about bullying. I'm just going to have to actually pull up the video.